There's a moment, usually at night, when you become aware of something without seeing it. No sound, no movement, just the sudden, unmistakable sense that you're not alone, even when you know you are. This sensation doesn't arrive through logic. It doesn't announce itself with evidence. It appears fully formed, already complete. And once it's there, it's impossible to ignore. Most fears announce themselves clearly. A noise, a shape, a threat you can point to. But this one doesn't. This one watches. The fear of being watched is older than monsters, older than stories, older than language. It doesn't require belief. It doesn't require imagination. It lives in the nervous system. Think about how your body responds in those moments. Your breathing changes, your muscles tense, your awareness sharpens. You don't scream, you don't run, you freeze. Because somewhere deeply embedded in the human mind, being watched means something is deciding what to do with you. This fear appears early in human development. Children report it before they understand death, before they understand danger, before they understand folklore. They describe it the same way that adults do. Presence, focus, a sense of attention directed toward them. What's remarkable is not that this fear exists, it's how consistent it is. Across cultures, across centuries, across people who have never shared language, religion, or tradition. Everywhere humans have slept in the dark, they have described something watching them. From doorways to corners, from tree lines to rooftops, from places just beyond reach. These figures don't always attack, and in fact, most of the time they don't. They observe, they wait, they linger at the edge of awareness. Predators hunt, and watchers witness. And this distinction is important, because being hunted implies action, being watched implies judgment. The watcher doesn't rush, the watcher doesn't need to. Time is already on their side. So, this is why the watcher's stories are so difficult to dismiss. They don't rely on spectacle, they don't escalate, they don't resolve, they simply remain. And that remaining, the refusal to act, creates a particular kind of psychological pressure. A pressure humans have been responding to for tens of thousands of years. This is not a fear we learned, this is a fear we remember. Tonight, we're not talking about monsters that chase or consume. We're talking about the ones that stand still, the ones that look back, the ones that appear when we're most vulnerable, asleep, alone, distracted, or unsure. These are the night watchers, and once you notice how often they appear, you may start to recognize just how familiar they already are. Exploring the shared nightmares of humanity, I'm your host, Kitty, and this is episode 3, The Night Watchers, Observation as Fear. All right, so before we can compare watcher stories across cultures, we need to be clear about what the watcher actually is, because not every monster that appears at night qualifies. A watcher is defined less by what it does and more by what it doesn't. It does not pursue, it does not immediately harm, it does not announce itself, it observes. Across cultures, watcher entities share a consistent set of traits. These traits appear regardless of time period, geography, or belief system, and that consistency is key. Core trait number 1 is observation over action. Watcher entities are primarily described as standing, sitting, perching, hovering. They remain still, even when noticed. Even when they are seen clearly, this stillness is not passive. It's deliberate. Movement suggests intent, and stillness suggests decision, and that uncertainty is what destabilizes the observer. Core trait number 2 is proximity to human vulnerability. Watchers appear when humans are sleeping, isolated, injured, distracted, or crossing thresholds. They don't confront strengths, they emerge during exposure. Nighttime is not incidental. Sleep strips away social defenses, and it removes witnesses and leaves the body unguarded. Core trait number 3 is liminal positioning. Watchers occupy boundaries, doorways, windows, corners, tree lines, rooftops, and the foot of the bed. They exist where one space becomes another. Thresholds are where meaning collapses, and watchers linger there. Core trait number 4 is directed attention. Witnesses consistently report not just being seen, but being focused on. Eyes are emphasized, faces may be indistinct, but attention is unmistakable. This is an important distinction. Plenty of animals look at humans. Watcher entities regard them. Core trait number 5 is unclear motive. Perhaps the most unsettling element of watchers is the absence of explanation. The watcher does not speak, it does not signal, it does not clarify intent. This leaves the human mind to do what it does best, fill in the gaps. Ambiguity is not a flaw in these stories, it is the engine. So, what are watchers not? It's just as important to define what watchers aren't. They're not simple predators, they're not moral punishers, and they're not clearly benevolent guardians. They don't fit neatly into good or evil because they resist classification. This resistance allows the watcher archetype to migrate. It can adapt to cultural fears, social stress, technological change, without losing its core function. So, this makes the watcher encounter feel intimate, private, as if the experience was meant for one person alone. And this is part of why they linger in the memory. This is why people hesitate to talk about them. And this is why stories persist across generations. To be watched is to be singled out. And that's deeply destabilizing. From a psychological perspective, watchers externalize a specific fear. The fear of being noticed at the wrong moment. Not doing something wrong, not being judged, simply being seen. This fear doesn't require wrongdoing, it just requires vulnerability. Now that we've defined the watcher archetype, we can begin to recognize it, not as a single creature, but as a recurring presence. In the next section, we'll trace watcher figures across cultures and see just how consistent the pattern truly is. Up to this point, we've discussed night watchers as a recurring idea. But ideas don't leave people shaken. Ideas don't wake someone gasping for air. Ideas don't produce testimony so similar they cross centuries unchanged. What we're dealing with now are accounts, descriptions given by ordinary people, farmers, monks, physicians, soldiers, many of whom had no reason to invent what they experienced. And critically, they did not describe monsters that attacked them. They described something that watched. One of the most detailed early accounts comes from Isbrand van Diemerbroek, a 17th century Dutch physician. In his medical writings, he describes patients who awoke unable to move, convinced that a devil lay upon them, not to hurt them, but to oppress them, so that they could neither draw breath nor cry out. That phrasing matters. Not to harm, not to kill, to be present. Similar testimonies appear across Europe. In England, 18th century diarist Samuel Johnson described waking to the sensation of crushing weight and an evil consciousness in the room. In Germany, folkloric court records include peasants testifying that a woman-shaped shadow sat upon my breast and stared. No attack follows, no conversation, only observation. What's striking is that these accounts come before modern medical understanding of sleep paralysis. Yet the experience is described with clinical precision: pressure, inability to move, awareness, fear. In Norse regions, first-hand encounters with Amara appear in saga fragments and oral testimony collected in the 19th century. One Icelandic account describes a man who woke with breath stolen and knew she was there, though I could not see her face. Another Swedish record describes the Mara standing by the bed, silent until the body could move again. What's important here is duration. The watcher does not vanish immediately, it waits. And notably, the Mara is not always framed as malicious. Some witnesses believe the Mara was a displaced soul. Others thought she was a warning, but none describe an attack. This is actually where the term nightmare comes from. Kanashibari accounts are among the most consistent and most modern. Japanese folklorist Yanagita Kunio collected dozens of first-hand testimonies in the early 20th century. One witness reported, "I could not move. I knew something was behind me. I did not see it, but I knew it was aware of me." Another, "There was no face, just attention." This is critical. In many Kanashibari experiences, there is no visible creature. The fear comes from directed awareness. The watcher exists as a presence, not a form, which removes cultural imagery from the equation entirely. Brazilian accounts of the Pisadera are unusually visual. In an 1896 Sao Paulo newspaper interview, a woman described an old woman standing on the roof, watching before she entered the room. Another witness stated, "She did not touch me at first. She watched until I realized she was there." Medical journals later attempted to explain the experience physiologically, but notably, the watcher component never disappeared, even when belief shifted. Urban environment, nighttime, observation before paralysis, the pattern holds. In Slavic folklore collections, witnesses describe entities that appear inside the home. One Russian account, "I woke and saw something near the stove, watching. It did not move until I could." Another account from Poland, "It stood by the bed. I felt seen, and then it was gone." These are not wilderness spirits. These are not distant monsters. They enter the most intimate space possible. Across continents, centuries, and belief systems, witnesses agree on several points. The experience happens during vulnerability. The body cannot move. The presence is aware of the person. The intent is unclear. The fear comes from observation and not violence. This consistency is statistically improbable if the experience were purely cultural invention. Something is happening at the intersection of biology, psychology, and perception. So, if these watchers appear without shared mythology, without shared geography, and without shared belief, then the next question isn't what are they, it's where they come from. The experiences we've just explored do not live in the stories alone. They live in the body. Breath held, muscles frozen, heart racing long after the presence disappears. Whatever witnesses believed they saw or felt, the physiological response is undeniable. To understand why watchers feel real, we need to move from folklore to human biology, from narrative to mechanism. This is not about disproving belief, it's about examining the system behind the experience. The human brain evolved to keep us alive, not to tell stories. One of the most critical functions is threat detection. Before we had language, before civilization, our ancestors needed to sense danger quickly. This included movement in the periphery, unusual sounds in darkness, eyes that might be watching. Modern neuroscience shows that the brain can register intent before form. You don't need to see a predator to know that you're being hunted. That sensation, the certainty of being observed, is older than speech. This mechanism is sometimes called hypervigilant awareness. It occurs under very specific conditions. The body is partially immobilized, the brain is in a light sleep or hypnagogic state, the environment is quiet, low light, or isolated. In this state, the mind fills gaps aggressively. But this is not random hallucination. Brain imaging studies show activity in the amygdala during the processing of fear, the temporal parietal junction, creating the sensation of another's presence, the visual cortex, even without direct visual stimuli. The brain does not invent chaos, it invents attention. And that's why watchers often do not move, speak, and they simply exist. Humans are hardwired for agency detection. Assuming intent, even falsely, was safer for survival than ignoring potential threat. A rustle in the bushes automatically becomes a predator. A branch that moves in the wind might become claws reaching out. During paralysis or liminal states, this system misfires in very specific ways. It doesn't invent random monsters. It constructs watchers, observers, and silent attention. And this explains the common thread between European night hags, the Japanese kanashibari, the Brazilian pisadera, modern American glowing-eyed watchers like Mothman. Different forms, but that same underlying mechanism. Culture gives the watcher a face. It explains the variations that we see. So like that night hag appears female, European, domestic. The kanashibari is often formless and shadowy. The pisadera is gaunt, long-nailed, Brazilian. But the experience itself, the paralysis, the sensation of being observed, it remains consistent. The brain produces the signal, culture interprets the image, which is why these experiences cannot be explained away as mere folklore. Understanding the mechanism does not strip the watcher of its significance. If anything, it strengthens it. Because if the nervous system can reliably generate identical fear responses in isolated regions and unrelated peoples, this story is not arbitrary. These stories are psychological signals encoded in the human body long before language, long before belief. Whether these signals respond to unseen external forces or entirely internal processes remains unknown. Consider what distinguishes watchers from other cryptids. Again, they don't attack, they don't usually communicate, and they don't leave marks or take anything. They only exist long enough to be noticed. That presence alone is sufficient because observation itself creates terror. And now we arrive at that final piece of the puzzle. If the experience is real, the body reacts consistently, culture interprets but does not invent, then the question is not who or what the watcher is. The question is when and why do these watchers appear? Particularly in moments of disaster, disruption, or profound uncertainty. Picture yourself standing alone on the edge of a village at night, near the dark edge of the forest, wind rustling through skeletal trees. The air is still, but somehow too heavy. Every shadow stretches longer than it should. Every sound, distant rustle, faint snapping branch, carries an intention that your mind cannot yet identify. For humans, this is not imagination alone. Our brains and bodies are hardwired to detect presence before threat, to sense observation even when there is no one there. In countless reports over centuries, people describe watching figures, shadows, humanoid shapes, glowing eyes. They rarely move, they do not attack, yet their presence alone can freeze the body, spike the heart rate, and leave witnesses with an unshakable feeling of dread. And while the forms differ, a spectral woman in Europe, a silent shadow in Japan, a gaunt figure on rooftops in Brazil, the core experience is remarkably consistent. The body reacts before conscious understanding. The watcher is not random. It is a manifestation of deeply embedded human fear, appearing most often during moments of uncertainty, danger, or crisis. Let's explore why these figures appear, the environments and circumstances that summon them, how they interact with both the human nervous system and culture, and what they reveal about the architecture of fear itself. In Venice, 1576, chroniclers reported figures silently watching from rooftops and windows prior to plague outbreak. One witness noted, "The shadow of a woman was seen silently staring at those yet untouched. Within days, sickness followed her gaze." Similar figures appeared in towns across Germany and England, often described as observing and not interacting. In rural Germany in 1702, records describe a man-shaped silhouette appearing on hillsides in advance of the famines. Priests wrote, "The figure watched silently, yet all who observed it felt a chill of death. Soon, illness and scarcity spread among townsfolk." In England, 1680s, parish diaries mentioned shadowy female forms appearing near homes before epidemics. The form was quiet, unmoving, yet oppressive. In the 18th century, during famine periods in rural France, villagers claimed a man-shaped silhouette would be seen at the edge of the woods days before a local misfortune. One French priest recorded, "I saw him upon the hill, quiet as the wind, yet his eyes followed each passerby. Soon after, illness spread among the children." These accounts are consistent. The watcher precedes its threat. Attack is never reported, and observation alone is sufficient to trigger fear. In Edo-period Japan, villagers kept diaries noting shadowy figures on rooftops or ridges before storms, floods, or earthquakes. One diary entry from 1782 says, "A black shape stood atop the ridge. We fled before the typhoon arrived. None dared question the presence." In rural China in late 19th century, reports of silhouettes at windows shortly before floods. Witnesses described feeling watched by something unseen, even when alone. In Korea in the 17th century, there was documentation of silent watchers appearing before major famines, often described as formless shadows or faintly human silhouettes. We see several commonalities here. They appear in advance of calamity, silently and without direct interaction. The human body registers that threat before any rational explanation emerges. In Russia, Siberian oral histories recount shadowy figures wandering forests before blizzards or sudden freezes. Hunters reported a presence lingering in the trees. No snow fell yet, but the figure knew it would. Folklorists suggest these accounts served as community warnings, encoded in myth to encourage survival behaviors during extreme weather. So as we talked about in the last episode, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 through 1967, the Mothman sightings occurred. There were over 100 eyewitnesses who each similarly reported, "It watched me silently, and I felt it knew something I did not." The sightings clustered in the months preceding the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15th of 1967. But beyond Mothman, multiple Native American oral histories describe winged observing figures that appear prior to floods, storms, or other natural threats. Even modern U.S. accounts of nighttime watchers in rural areas often correlate with isolated accidents or natural hazards. This suggests that vigilance and stress prime the nervous system for these experiences. We touched on this briefly in the last section, but modern neuroscience offers insight here. Hypervigilance, stress heightens sensory sensitivity to movement, sound, and gaze. Activation of the amygdala, the fear center, triggers physiological responses before conscious thought. Temporoparietal junction creates the sensation of another's presence. Sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations immobilize the body, amplifying the perception of a watcher. In these moments, the brain does not hallucinate randomly. It produces signals of potential threat. The observer may be seen, sensed, or only felt. The effect is nearly identical across unrelated populations. Think of it as the body externalizing anxiety into a perceivable form. The watcher exists as a bridge between perception and the unknown, tangible enough to trigger fear, but intangible enough to remain unexplained. Although the imagery changes with culture, the watcher represents a patterned response to danger, formed by evolution, interpreted through culture. Form may differ, but function does not. So let's talk a little bit more about disaster and trauma case studies. Plague in Venice. This was in 1576. Shadow figures appeared on rooftops days before the local outbreak. Local mortality aligned with these sightings, and diary accounts detailed increased anxiety and physical symptoms. Point Pleasant, again, 1966 to 1967. Those Mothman sightings spiked in the months before the bridge collapse, and witnesses described an uneasy foreknowledge rather than a visible attack. The typhoon in Edo, Japan, 1782. Villagers observed shadowy forms atop ridges before the storm, and those diary accounts document fleeing behavior, with the storm occurring shortly after. In Sao Paulo, in the 1890s, the Pisadera reports coincided with household misfortunes and sudden deaths. These examples do suggest that watchers serve as a premonitory marker, externalized anxiety occurring in both individuals and communities under threat. What emerges is a clear principle. Watchers externalize human fear before events unfold. Form is cultural, but the mechanism is biological. The experience is consistent in the mind, the body, and reported observation. In short, the watcher is not just folklore. It is a patterned response to stress, uncertainty, and danger given shape by our cultures. And now this brings us to creatures that embody fear even more directly. The vampire archetypes. Like watchers, vampires operate in the liminal spaces of night and threshold, like graveyards. Like watchers, they signal danger before it strikes, but in a more aggressive, predatory form. Both remind us that human fear is externalized, sometimes silently and sometimes through story. The watchers show us the mechanics of human fear. The vampires show us the mythic manifestation of fear. By understanding watchers, we understand the psychology underpinning vampire legends worldwide. Silent figures, shadows in the night, the feeling of being observed. They teach us that fear arrives first, messenger before the danger itself. As we move from watchers to creatures that hunt and feed in myth, remember, these patterns persist because they are deeply embedded in the human nervous system, in memory and in story. The next episodes will explore vampires, predators of folklore who embodied what watchers only hint at: threat, mortality, and the limits of human understanding. And no matter the location, the culture, or the era, fear knows no borders.